Coming up in just a few moments, we'll talk about a place in Charlottesville that you probably don't know about, but you should. But first, we're going to talk about one of the most insidious forms of political corruption that goes on right here in Virginia and what you can do to stop it. I'm Coy Barefoot. Let's get started right now.
I'm gerrymandering, and I approve this message. Virginians need change and hope or whatever, and I'll bring change and hope or whatever by picking my voters and redrawing district maps to ensure I always get reelected. Heck, every single member of the General Assembly who was already in office got reelected last year thanks to the Commonwealth's unfair redistricting process. But me, I'm here to represent you. I'll listen to your ideas. I'll work tirelessly for your causes. Heck, maybe I'll get an aircraft carrier named after me someday. As your representative, I pledge to eliminate competition in elections. I'll eat away at voter rights by redrawing district maps. I can even draw lines to carve out families and neighborhoods who might vote against me. Isn't that super cool? My opponents might say that drawing district lines like this undermines the fairness of our democracy. It eliminates electoral competition, and it denies the rights of voters from every political party. Anyway, check out this tractor. So vote for me, gerrymandering. Probably definitely running unopposed. Approved and paid for by One Virginia 2021.
Welcome to the program. Brian Kennan joins me. He is the executive director of One Virginia 2021. Brian, what did we just see? Who is gerrymandering? I mean, what is this? That's a commercial that your organization produced.
Yeah.
Tell us what it means.
It's a fictional character. Basically, we've got to find a way to talk about a really nerdy, boring, intellectually interesting, but maybe not interesting to everybody issue, and make it bring it home to everybody. And this is our way to do it. It's the fact that rigged elections are ruining our democracy. And the people who are rigging them are the politicians who are incumbents, both Republicans and Democrats. Jerry doesn't have a political party, but you see in the video that he gets to pick his own voters, carve up his neighborhood, carve out people he doesn't like, keep people in he does like, and make sure he gets reelected.
So for the American citizen who is watching us now, who learned about gerrymandering oftentimes in grade school, thankfully, but then it just sort of disappears. It becomes like, well, this is just business as usual. This is how they do it in politics, whether it's the state house or in federal elections. They've always done it like this. What's particularly bad about it today, such that we have an organization like yours that really wants to do something about it?
Yeah, well, you're right, Coy. It's always been a problem. Not Thomas Jefferson. Patrick Henry, the governor of Virginia back in the day, actually has the first gerrymander, even before Governor Eldridge Gerry in Massachusetts did his, where he lumped James Madison and James Monroe in the same congressional district in an effort to get his anti-federalist candidate, Monroe, into Congress. It didn't work. Madison won. So it is an age-old problem. Yeah. Usually people just attribute it as it's a Republican or Democratic thing. It ebbs and flows. Yeah. What's happening now is a little bit more insidious, is with all the data they have about us as citizens, what races we vote in, who we contribute to, what church we go to, or what our Facebook profile says about us. They can target these districts, and with the increased sophistication of computers, they can target these districts to ensure exactly what they want happens in the election.
Yeah, and so politicians continue to choose their own voters instead of the other way around, which is how it should be in a democratic process. But what do you say to somebody who says, well, what's wrong with that?
Yeah.
What's wrong with elected leaders deciding, who they want their voters to be?
Yeah, here's what's wrong with it. It's when you have the ability to carve out somebody from a district who might run against you. If you're an incumbent state senator and you're worried, Coy, that you might run against you, and I go into the neighborhood that's otherwise in my district and I say, Coy might run against me for state senate, and I carve you out of that, carve you and your family out of that district because you might oppose me, that's the problem. It's hard enough to get good candidates, and our technology is sophisticated enough now that we're able to do just that.
Yeah, yeah. The technology has never been this sophisticated. The big data they have on people has never been this rich.
Exactly.
Never been so used to really capture people like this.
Exactly.
It's just amazing. I mean, I keep coming back to the word corruption. I mean, that's what this is. It's a corruption of the democratic process, which is a corruption of our ideals.
Mm-hmm. Congressman Scott Ridgell, the retiring congressman out of Virginia Beach in Virginia's 2nd congressional district, I think states it the best. He says we're in a state of hyper gerrymandering now. Like, we've always had gerrymandering, right?
Yeah.
Madison and Monroe. But now it's gotten out of hand. And that's why you're seeing a lot of folks on both sides of the aisle stepping forward to say, we got to fix this.
Right. So how do we fix it?
Sure.
What are the proposals that your organization has put out there that has people around the state talking about One Virginia 2021?
Absolutely. Well, the good news is there's a lot of models in other states that we can kind of pick and pull the best
Other
options
people have
they got.
figured this out, right?
Yes, we're not on the bleeding edge of this. We'll be a little behind in it. There's about 16 other states that have done it. Most of them have done it by going around their state legislature with a citizens initiative. That's not available to us here.
We don't have that.
We don't have that. But some states, including Ohio, controlled all by Republicans, by the way, including Governor Kasich, and Nebraska, the same story, have gone through their state legislature. Nebraska's about ready to establish an independent commission and make partisan gerrymandering illegal. And I think the latter part is the most important. And that is, can we take it, we're drawing a district to benefit one political party or another, or more importantly, one individual or another, is illegal. Just
right.
Can we just put a rule out there that says it's legal? Because right now there aren't a lot of laws about how we should redistrict. There are very few. There's the Voting Rights Act, there's an equal population requirement, and there's the Virginia constitutional requirements for compact and contiguous. Otherwise, it's kind of the Wild West, and you get these crazy shaped districts that are drawn specifically to make sure somebody gets reelected.
Right. It shouldn't be just shameful, which it is.
Yeah.
The corruption of our ideals, it should be illegal.
Yes.
We should have those who come after us to say, oh my gosh, we would never consider doing that. You know,
Yeah.
and is the bipartisan, or even better, nonpartisan commission, is that the way to go here in Virginia? Have you looked at the other models and said, you know what, that really works?
I think it is. I mean, no matter what, you've got to make political gerrymandering illegal, right? You know, whether you do that by putting it in the state constitution or you put it in the state code, either way, make the drawing of a district for one party or another, one individual or another, illegal.
Right.
But the best way to do it is to put an umpire in there, so the same people who are running in the districts, their own districts, aren't drawing their own districts, right? So a commission structure is the way to go. Now, Colorado has a commission structure that has 13 members on it. They find 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans, and they get together and they try to find a 13th person who's a saint. And shockingly, sometimes that person turns out to be a Republican or a Democrat.
Yeah.
Right? And then you get a bunch of maps past 7-6, 7-6. So I think there's some lessons to be learned from how states have done it before that we're incorporating it. Our organization isn't dogmatic about the solution, but we've got a very specific proposal that State Senator Jill Vogel has carried for us. She's a Republican senator out of Winchester, and we've had some great support. Yeah, she's been wonderful on it. She studies election law. She's an election lawyer, and it's a 7-member commission with 4 members appointed by the General Assembly and 3 who are nonpartisan officials. Now, no one on there would be a member of the General Assembly, their spouse, or a lobbyist, but you would have basically 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, one from each chamber, appointed by, and then the 3 nonpartisan officials would be your state auditor of public accounts, your state inspector general, and your executive director of the state bar. These are 3 people who, they might be partisans personally, but they take that hat off.
Yeah.
They
know how to be professionally nonpartisan.
Correct, yeah, that's it.
Which is what you need in those, because these are professionally nonpartisan seats. This is what they're going to do.
Yeah, this is a technocratic exercise, and it's been politicized.
So what's the key to reaching the holdouts in the General Assembly who look at this and roll their eyes and say, you don't understand, Brian. You don't get it. This is how we do things in Richmond.
Exactly.
You just don't get it.
I think sunlight helps, right? You know, your viewers listening to this and knowing that not only is it a problem, how nefarious the problem is, but also there's a solution in One Virginia 2021 that's broadly bipartisan. We've got great support in the state Senate here. We've all statewide elected officials support redistricting reform, and pretty much every president I can think of in my lifetime has supported redistricting reform, from Ronald Reagan all the way to President Obama mentioned it in the State of the Union. So it's got broad bipartisan support. The House of Delegates is where these reforms have traditionally gone and met. They call it tabling, but I call it killing the bills. Right.
Yeah.
So these bills pass the Senate.
Brian, that's a wonderful idea, son. We're going to put it over here and give it a lot of study and consideration. Next.
Later. Yeah. So, but what we've seen is Republican members of the General Assembly in the House step up to support this as well. People kind of assume the Democrats are always with us. That's not always true, but we've got some great support from Democrats.
Right.
But Delegate Steve Landis this year put in a redistricting reform bill that would have made the political gerrymandering illegal, a huge step forward. He's in the leadership, well respected, has been there 20 years.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of his peers and his colleagues are starting to see that this is a problem they've got to address. And maybe we can address it in a different way than Colorado's addressed it, but we've got to address this problem.
Yeah, and the key here, the takeaway, and I know you know this, is that this isn't a Republican thing, this isn't a Democratic thing, this is an American thing.
Right.
And every American should be outraged that we allow this kind of corruption to continue in Washington and then in any state capital where they continue to get away with it.
Yeah, if you look at the gridlock in our political system, it's hard not to drive it back down to this fact, right?
Right,
This
and connect those dots for us, because when people look at the deadlock in the political process and nothing's getting done and all these people do is argue and it's the left goes further left, the right goes further right, they never compromise, that's become a dirty word.
Exactly.
What's the relationship between that dynamic and gerrymandering, this uber gerrymandering we have now?
We don't have competitive elections, right? Now, not to say that if we fix redistricting reform, every district would be competitive, but right now, almost none are. In the General Assembly last November, every incumbent member got reelected. And the year before—
Every single one?
Every single one. 122 out of the 140 were running for reelection. There were 18 open seats. All 122 got reelected. The year before that, when Mark Warner and Ed Gillespie were in a tight race for the U.S. Senate that came within 1 percentage point, every congressional seat was also up, and not a single one of them came within 15 percentage points of each other. So these just aren't competitive elections. And if you don't have competitive elections, you can't hold your congressman or your state house or your state senator, you can't hold them accountable. So what they do is they focus exclusively on the primaries and never on the general, and you get these polarized positions that says, my way or the highway, and you don't get things done.
Yeah, and that kind of process rewards the extreme. Because if the election is in the primary, you're going to tend to vote for the one who's more extreme.
Yeah, and it distorts it so that we favor the extremes. Not that the extremes aren't a part of the process, but that where's the middle gone?
Right.
And the middle is pretty much vacant here because we've rigged these districts to be so safe for people.
Yeah, and the vast majority of Americans who are in the middle sort of shrug their shoulders and say, this system no longer represents me.
Exactly.
I feel so out of touch. And one of the real dangers, Brian, too, is that with this uber gerrymandering, this real scientific kind of gerrymandering, you don't get this free market of ideas. If you don't have competitive elections, then you don't have a free market of ideas.
Absolutely.
And for all of those who pound the table for free markets, why can't we have free markets in our politics as well, in our political process?
Would be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's the good news. America has a history of making this better. If you look back to the Revolutionary War, if you look to the Civil War, if you look to the suffrage movement even 100 years ago, why would a bunch of men give women the right to vote? That was a really, from a narrow Machiavellian political interest, that was a dumb move on their part.
Right.
The same thing could be said for white folks in the 60s, passing the Civil Rights Act and legislation that was the full promise of the 15th Amendment to minority communities. And even if you look back to a bunch of politicians that got to Congress passing bipartisan campaign finance reform 15 years ago. Now, it's been gutted by the courts, but they took a vote to change the system, like many generations had before, to change the system in a way that might not benefit them, but would benefit the republic. So we got it in us to fix this problem.
Yeah.
And I think the zeitgeist is changing nationally on this, and our organization and a lot of bipartisan support is making a big difference.
You're right. I mean, that's one of the great things about America is so much of our American past, you have to look back through slit fingers, like, oh my gosh, was that us?
Did we do that?
Did we do that? But what's great about America is we're the ones who hopefully we get it. at some point we get it and we recognize, you know what, that's wrong. That's wrong. Some things are right, some things are wrong. And this is corruption.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can fix it. How can people learn more? How can they help?
Sure.
Who do they need to call? What can they do?
So one easy step will let your state senator and state delegate know you support us, and let us know you support us. And that's if you go on our website, One Virginia, which is all spelled out, 2021, which is the next time we redistrict in Virginia, 2021. So onevirginia2021.org/petition. And you can sign our petition, and it'll email your state senator and delegate and tell them you support it as well instantly. You can follow us on Facebook or on Twitter. We're very active on both of those. And if you want a nice way to share with your friends, share that Jerry video. It's at the top of our Facebook page. It's at the front of our website, and it's at the front of our Twitter feed as well. It's a good intro to kind of, politics could use a little more humor sometimes.
So right now, after people watching this show, and they will stay to the end, with a few clicks, they can get involved and do something.
Easily. And if they ever want to reach out, director at One Virginia 2021, I would love the emails and help to do this, because we're building all over the state, because it's a local issue that impacts local communities, because it's how your neighborhood's divided, how your community's divided. What kind of representation do you actually send to Richmond?
And I don't think most Virginians realize the extent of the problem.
Yeah.
And that's one thing here is an educational learning curve, so that everybody realizes that it is completely corrupt.
Yeah. And that's what hopefully Jerry will do for us, help get that word out.
Absolutely. Brian, thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Brian Cannon, he is the Executive Director of One Virginia 2021. You can learn more online tonight, right now, at One Virginia, all spelled out, 2021.org. I'm Coy Barefoot. We'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Andrea Douglas joins me. She is the Executive Director of the African American Heritage Center at Charlottesville's Jefferson School. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Coy, for inviting me.
So, I'm a huge fan of the center and the work you do there. Take a moment for those who've never been there and aren't aware of this gem of a resource that we have in downtown Charlottesville. Help them understand what it is and what they might find if they go there.
Right. Well, the African American Heritage Center is really an art center. We approach the intrinsic history of the Jefferson School in what we hope to be an interdisciplinary way, so that when we're talking about African American history, Charlottesville's history, or Jefferson School in particular's history, that we're doing it with multiple mediums. So in there is a permanent exhibition that tells right now the history of the school from a little earlier than its origins, 1863, to about 1920. But we tell the story in relationship to the quintessential issue of education. Because education was then and is now one of those places of racial ownership, articulation, all of those kinds of things. The very first thing you see when you walk into our exhibition is Thomas Jefferson. And we talk about Jefferson's notion of an educated populace. All right? The next thing we do is David Walker's Appeal, which was one of the most important documents created in the mid-19th century. Right? We go from there to Nat Turner. Again, two educated African American people, two people who, for their time, were considered dangerous. And so suddenly, education becomes this battlefield. And so we take the history of the Jefferson School and the origins of the Jefferson School as a way of describing how a community creates itself vis-a-vis those kinds of vehicles. And it involves politics, it involves race, it involves all manner of the kinds of things that we think about even today. So that's one thing. But right across the hall, for instance, right now, we have an exhibition about Danville in 1963, which is like a temporal leap of 100 years almost, right? And we're talking about yet another unknown story in Virginia, something that for our state, Bloody Sunday is the event that we're describing.
Right.
We're talking about Martin Luther King, who was in Charlottesville just before he went to Danville. And so there's a connection there. But
it's amazing that most Americans don't know about Danville and what happened in Danville and how it, for its time, it was at the epicenter of the civil rights struggle. King knew all about it. King was ready to march in Danville. I mean, everybody was watching Danville, Virginia.
Exactly. And that is, in some ways, the way in which the Heritage Center operates. It hopes to bring to this community and people who visit those stories that are not part of the meta-narrative, let's call it.
Right.
But those stories that are so intrinsically important to how we understand America. The Jefferson School is 100 years.
And for people hearing that for the first time, Andrea, the Jefferson School, a real quick sketch of what that is.
Sure. The Jefferson School was founded in 1865, just months after emancipation. It began as a freedmen's school. It was until 1951 the only African-American school in Charlottesville. Its origins are over by where the Amtrak station is now. It moves up to its place now in about 1894. At that point, it's a graded school. They build a high school right next to it in 1926. In that period, in 1926, you actually have a precinct of education because there's a preschool, Barrett preschool is there, there is a graded school, and then there is a high school. So African American education is happening right in there as the community is building around it. Its 5 churches are there. Yeah. Vinegar Hill traverses that landscape. So it is kind of, in many ways, an epicenter and continues to be an epicenter. It ultimately closes as the African American elementary school in 1965. In 1966, it reopens as the 6th grade. And then thereafter, it's used in various kinds of ways.
Right, daycare center and all sorts of stuff.
Exactly. But, from the point of view of sort of a historical point of view, in 1926, when it's open, that's a significant moment in and of itself, right? By 1930, it is an accredited high school, which adds another level of democratization of education. Prior to that moment, African American people had to leave Charlottesville. School was only available up to the 7th grade. They learned the 8th grade surreptitiously because 8th grade was considered high school. So not everyone could afford it, a secondary education. You wanted one, you had to leave. When it becomes an accredited school, when they open the high school, it means that the entire population of Charlottesville's African American community can now receive advanced education.
A full education.
Exactly.
For the first time.
For the first time. Right?
Which says, there's so much there. It says so much about, the white power structure denying, intentionally, using the power of government and of law, to deny a full education to people of color.
Exactly.
It's
and education is the ground here. There is in this story you see the direct relationship between education, law, and public space even, right? Because when you're beginning to even think about how do you integrate your schools, this becomes about where can you put a black school? Where can you put black people?
Right.
Right? So when you think about what West Haven is, when you think about what
public housing
is,
right.
What you're really thinking about is not new territory in terms of black space. What they do is they scrape off black space to add new space on.
Because they don't want to expand it.
You can't expand it.
Yeah.
Right? So Venable, and
It's amazing.
Yeah, and so when you start to think about it in those kinds of terms, and you can really sort of see all of that unfold in a building that even in and of itself, its mere presence, it's almost 4 acres long. There is no other school in Charlottesville that is 4 acres long.
This big.
That big. And it grades back towards Preston Avenue. And with each addition, there is a loss. With each addition, there's a response to a moment in historic
Right. Because white city leaders didn't want to build another school over here.
Can't.
They would just add on to this one because they only wanted the one.
Right, and you couldn't.
Right.
I mean, literally, you could not. Jim Crow laws would not, you couldn't.
Yeah.
Right?
Andrea, I only have a couple of minutes left, but I do want to give you an opportunity. You mentioned public space, and you know, there's this discussion now in Charlottesville about the R.E. Lee statue, and without getting into specifics of that debate, take a moment just to reflect on the relationship between public space and the past and the African American experience in Charlottesville and really in the South, and how we engage with that in public spaces through things like statues or even buildings like the Jefferson School.
Well, you know, this debate is not new. I think that with the dialogue on race, there was this desire to create some object that would respond to the public space. And so the Vinegar Hill Monument was that object. And I am certainly an advocate for this monument and certainly an advocate for this artist because I believe in
the Vinegar Hill Monument.
The Vinegar Hill Monument. And the artist, Melvin Edwards, is an internationally known artist. But he's also an artist whose history mirrors in many ways the history of those people in Charlottesville that this object hopes to call to attention. So my hope is that as we start to think about those things in our spaces, that we think more about those permanent things. Because, you know, art in place, for instance, where we see most of our contemporary sculpture, it's transient. That stuff goes away in a year. This is a seated thing by an artist who is known for creating this kind of work. You know, you find Melvin Edwards at Watts, you find Melvin Edwards in Harlem, you find Melvin Edwards in Newark, right? If you trace where he is located even, you then begin to have a conversation about race with just this one object.
But people want their monuments to be a guy on a horse or the statue of a man or a woman, and they're uncomfortable when it's contemporary art. It forces them to engage in a new kind of way, in a different kind of way, which is good.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a certain level of didacticism. There's a certain level of association. There is the attribution of biography to those kinds of things, where these things, this Melvin Edwards does not hold that specific attribute.
Right.
It can and will be many things to many people, but located, but located and cited and contextualized. So in reality, it can really only be one or two, you know? It's in that conversation is its conversation by that artist who is always having that conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Andrea, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
All right.
Andrea Douglas, she is the executive director of the African American Heritage Center at Charlottesville's historic Jefferson School. I'm Coy Barefoot. Have a terrific week, and y'all be good to each other.